If you wanna be a better miniature painter, the most important piece of advice that I can give you is to use 2D approach on your minis. Okay, but what do I really mean by that? And why would you even use an approach that belongs to 2D medium on a 3-dimensional model? Well, let me explain all of it as I paint this Space Marine that is inspired by this beautiful illustration from Warpforge, and which I will be giving away. But first, have you ever used this? Ah yes, the classic Null Oil, the silver bullet that improves every miniature in a blink of an eye. But what if I told you that by using washes, you already are using 2D techniques on your minis? Ha ha ha! Wait. What the f did I just say? By using a wash that physically flows into recesses, you are using a 2D technique? That can't be true. You can't really do that on a 2D canvas, right? Except... well, no, you can't. But what have you really done by using a wash? See, by washing your miniature, you are creating shadows and darkening the recesses. You could literally do the same thing without using any wash at all, and it would take longer, but the key idea is that you are shading your model. And shading is a 2D technique that you have used on a 3-dimensional model. If you didn't really have to shade your minis and highlight them to increase their 3D likeness, you could literally just base coat your minis and have them as they are, because the natural light will take care of the rest. But on such a small scale, the natural light won't really do that for you. So you definitely have to paint the shadows and the reflections to make the minis more credible. Therefore, we approach our minis as if it was a 2D canvas. So let me actually show you this approach as I try to copy this illustration from Warpforge on my Space Marine. The first obvious thing that you might notice is that the chest and the face are significantly lighter than the rest of the figure. This is by no mistake. The artist wants your eyes to be drawn to these points, and we'll do the same. Actually, I do that on most of my minis, and you'll see me paint the lightest parts where I want your attention. Hey, what you looking at? Anyway, I started with the helmet, since that's gonna be one of the brightest parts of this mini, and it will be this sort of ceiling that determines the rest. What you'll see me do is that I try to push more lighter layers towards the face mask of the Space Marine, as it's clearly the same way in the illustration. Now, as I was making significant progress on the helmet, I realized one important thing. The head and the chest are not aligned the same way as in the picture. So while I could push the reflection towards the middle of the helmet, so it aligns with the chest, I decided to keep it that way to keep the focus on the face. Even though the light reflection in this case won't be 100% correct, it's more important to paint something that looks good and credible, not necessarily correct. This is a very important point. You don't need to make your paint job correct or realistic, but it needs to be credible. You can bend the rules and the reality a little bit, so you can make something else work better. So in this case, I try to push the light towards the face, even though it should be somewhere else. But by doing so, I keep your attention there. Another example is this light effect on this mushroom that shouldn't really hit this helmet, since the squig is in the way. But by painting some magenta light in there, I further emphasize this effect, even though it's technically wrong. As I am finishing this helmet here, you can see that we painted quite a bright face mask, and I am further making sure that the lenses are bright and saturated with color. To do that, I painted the lenses as I normally do, but on top of that, I applied a bit of fluo green and fluo yellow to really make sure that the lenses pop. This is a really cool trick that you can use pretty much anywhere on your miniature where you wanna increase saturation. And progressing further, you'll notice that I won't go into as bright and saturated colors anywhere else on the mini as on the helmet. For the most part. There will be exceptions, as you'll see later, but for now, Notice how dark I paint his left leg. The OG picture has it as one of the darkest points, and it makes sense, since the background is quite light, so the entire silhouette stands out. This is also the reason why I use white background for the showcase of the miniature. Since there are mostly dark colors on the model, it works better. Oh, and actually, as I mentioned at the start, I will be giving away this model to one of you guys. That's because this video is sponsored by the upcoming free-to-play game Warpforge, which provided me with this beautiful illustration. If you haven't heard, Warpforge is a digital card game with the theme of Warhammer 40,000 universe. I had a chance to try it myself, and I think that I played like 50 games in a row the first day, because it was so much fun. I mostly played an Eldari deck, but right now you can also play as Ultramarines, Orcs, Necrons, Black Legion and Tyranids. And they'll be adding even more. Aside from being fun by itself, the game has amazing visuals and absolutely killer voice acting.
You're not ready to take on a foe like me.
Right now the game is in closed alpha, for which you can register, but what you should definitely do is add it to your wishlist on Steam, so you won't miss it once it's released. Furthermore, to celebrate this upcoming release, I will be giving away this miniature to one of you guys. This giveaway will be done through my Instagram, and soon you'll find all the instructions there.
Go, go, go!
Thank you Warpforge for sponsoring this video, and again, check the link in the description. Anyway, as I continue on the miniature, I decided to use only freehands on it instead of using transfers. Is this because I fucking hate myself? Maybe, but it's mostly because of the fact that with this dramatic shading, it would look very out of place if there was a pure white decal on the armor. By freehanding it like I am a fucking Doctor Strange, I can also choose to make it significantly darker and maybe a bit lighter towards the top of the knee pad. Another hurdle that we have to deal with is his other leg. Now, on the illustration, this leg is much lighter on the thigh than the other one, but that's because the angle of the leg is very different. On our miniature though, this is not the case. The legs here are at a very similar angle, so my decision was to diverge from the illustration and keep the legs at a similar exposure. Overall, it's a great idea to take an inspiration from illustrations, but since you can't copy everything 100%, you can't become a slave to it. So what you'll see me do later is that I diverge from the picture on certain parts, because otherwise they wouldn't work as intended. One of these parts is the chest eagle. I've built some pretty light blue on the chest, which is actually similar to the picture, but the golden aquila can't be. Once I base coated the eagle with brown, the next obvious step was orange. All the subsequent layers were pushed from dark to light, which is usually the case when it comes to this layering approach. Obviously, I want some of the previous layers to be visible, but not too much of them. They are there simply to make this kinda smooth transition. It was around the moment I was adding this kinda ochre yellow that I realized I have to go way brighter than what the illustration is showing. It's definitely the case that the picture can get away with using a bit darker colors, and it still reads as something metallic. But I feel like on our miniatures you have to push the contrast even more. So instead of keeping the eagle in this sort of orange and ochre zone, I went all the way to really light yellow to sell the non-metallic metal effect. Progressing even further, this little badge thingy also has to diverge from the illustration. Here it's highlighted from both sides, but in reality it makes sense just for the bottom to catch more light. You'll also see me not blending too much on this mini, and the badge is a good example of that. Why am I not blending on this mini? Because I'm not fucking keeping it! But also, as you'll see later, it doesn't matter as much. Even if the gradient on this badge is not perfect, by painting a freehand on top of it, you kinda mask the imperfections. The same can be done with any kinda weathering. Furthermore, it's not like in real life everything is perfectly silky smooth either. Most armor and weapons have some weathering, and other materials have some texture to them. Also, it's not like I kept the gradients super rough. Progressing even further, I kept looking at my reference while painting, and it definitely made the process more enjoyable. Obviously, as I said, you can't just copy everything one-to-one, because the mini is not exactly the same as the illustration, but the reference helped me realize how much can I spread reflections and how light can I go. This means I spend less time fixing mistakes and use that time to progress elsewhere. Even following other people's miniatures as a reference can help you with that. And of course you don't have to copy them one to one, even though that is a good exercise. But knowing the overall direction of your painting will make it easier for you to get your minis done. Now, it's kinda obvious that I'm not including all the bits I recorded, but all the unedited footage, including the non-metallic metal and the freehands, will be on my Patreon, which is also a nice way to support this channel. Moving to the backpack, it makes sense that it should be quite light, perhaps as light as the chest, because it's very exposed. But this is yet another moment where we have to bend the reality for artistic purposes. Even though the backpack should be lighter, I choose to keep it dark, because that way we make other features stand out. It clearly can't be as dark as the bottom of his legs, but yeah, darker than the chest or the helmet for sure. Another interesting thing to note is that whatever I painted on my miniature, I tried to color match it with the original illustration, instead of following a paint recipe. To be perfectly honest, I don't know how to teach color matching, because it requires a lot of information that you must already know. However, if you already know how color theory works, you should be able to do it. If not, I guess it is something that just comes with practice, but I'm sure it can be learned. Just know that whatever I try to paint on this mini, be it the cloth, the blue armor, red helmet, or the weapons, I tried to use very similar colors as in the original artwork without using the benefit of paint recipes. Now if someone asks me which colors I used, I still try to answer as close as I can. But in the long run, you are better off trying to identify the colors yourself. But of course, this is not 100% accurate all of the time, so I do understand why paint recipes exist. As I approach to painting the weapons and most importantly the metallic parts, I wanna talk about the evergreen debate about which one is better, true metallics or non-metallic metal. Well, if you have made it to this part of the video, you should already have an idea where I stand on this topic. Since you get better quality the more you manually paint reflections and shades, it makes no difference what part of the mini you do that for. It's better for you to paint the reflections and shadows on the metallics yourself, instead of depending on natural light. In fact, painting non-metallic metal is no different than painting anything else. The only difference is that the reflections and shades are usually more extreme. But that's it. So when it comes to quality, using non-metallic metal on your small minis will get you better results. But Zumikito, non-metallic metal doesn't work from all angles. So, the reflections are painted. What's your point? If you turn the mini upside down, it'll look dog shit as well, because it's painted as if it's lit from above. I mean, honestly, if you take this argument to its logical conclusion, I mean, the fact that the painted reflections don't work from all angles, we would all be just base coating our minis. But I've already talked about that. Now, can you still get nice results with regular metallics? Sure. Should you use metallics if you are painting gaming minis? I mean, if you don't want to spend eternity on your minis and you don't want to go insane, absolutely. But if you are after quality, good non-metallic metal will be better than true metallics. And that's because it's a 2D approach used on a 3D medium. I had so much fun painting this miniature. It was a very different and interesting experience trying to copy the illustration. And I have to say that I might do it again in the future. Now, in this video I told you what you should do to improve your miniatures. But there are also many things that can absolutely ruin your minis and make your hobby a living hell. And actually, I talk about these things in this video. So if you wanna avoid them, check it out. And see you there.